welcome to the One of the Family podcast by Blue Circle Cement. I'm your host, Aisling Malloy. This is the podcast designed with tradespeople in mind. So we're going to be exploring important topics with the help of guests from the construction industry in the hope of promoting open conversation and to share some advice. On episode 1, I'm going to be joined by Peter Cape from Vanderbuilders to talk about mental health. Mental health is a very important topic within the construction industry, so we're going to be exploring it further in depth in episodes 2 and 3. We hope you enjoy episode 1. Hi Peter, you're our first ever guest in our podcast. You must be feeling very privileged.
It is an honour.
Yeah. Can you tell our listeners a bit about Vanderbuilders and what your role is?
Yeah, sure. Vanderbuilders is a charity by tradespeople for tradespeople. We do practical projects to help out tradespeople who've fallen on hard times through injury, ill health, whatever. We all began in 2016 when Adam Smith put out a call on a Facebook group to help out a friend and employee. And it snowballed from there. We became a registered charity almost 2 years ago. And have completed 14 projects to date, ranging from a full house renovations to a bathroom repair or bathroom replacement. Our last project, Chris's project, was absolutely phenomenal. We managed to deliver a project to the value of just over £32,000 for some cost to the charity of £140 because of fundraising, donations and sponsorship from people like Blue Circle.
Wow. When did you first get involved in Vanderbuilders?
I started following the Facebook page and the Twitter feed in the early days, and I kind of became increasingly involved throughout 2017, and I volunteered for Pippa's project. And I guess I'd been doing the right things or saying the right things, because at that point I was asked, when I was on Pippa's project, I was asked to join the administration team. And I've been kind of involved as a volunteer ever since.
Yeah. What's your role within Vanderbuilders then?
I head up the support and aftercare team. I also do some of the social media stuff. But predominantly my role is support and aftercare, which is twofold. Support is essentially, we have a closed Facebook group with just about 10,000 members. And it's a really great group. And it's a great open forum. People talk on there. It's not just kind of trade pictures, and people will ask for help. They'll ask for support. And my role in that is to, if anyone looks like they're struggling or anyone looks like they might need some support, me and the team that I work with on support, that will get highlighted to us, or we'll spot it ourselves. And we'll contact that person and signpost them to appropriate services, and offer them a kind of some options, really.
Yeah. So this is the first episode of the One of the Family podcast, and the topic we're going to be speaking about is a very important one. It's mental health. The trade industry is predominantly male. There's a perception that men don't talk. What's your thoughts on this?
It really winds me up. Men do talk. You see it all the time. I've seen it from recognised charities on their social media, on the kind of adverts that this people keep telling men they don't talk. And if you keep telling someone something, they might end up believing it's true. I think every time you tell a man that men don't talk, someone might believe you and someone might listen and someone might, I won't talk then. And the reality is men do talk. I I have very open conversations with my friendship group. The conversations I see on our close Facebook group are phenomenal. Men really do talk. It's about a permissive environment. If you block that and say men don't talk, and kind of push this kind of, I'll just go for a pint, it'll be fine lad culture out there, it's damaging. And men, if asked the question and in a way where you actually want to hear the answer, you actually want to listen, the "are you all right?" when it's "all right, mate," that's not an invitation to talk. But when it's "are you all right?" then men will talk. I think men are much better at talking than they're given credit for, than the kind of the media or the perception of that. I think sometimes, I don't know, it varies. I think, I go onto a lot of sites as a plumber where you go onto site, you don't really talk to anybody. There's the kind of inter-trade rivalries. But if you're just going in kind of, I do quite specialist stuff. So I'll be going in for a couple of days and then leaving. And I may not talk to another person on site. They're sometimes not very permissive environments. But then, when you're on a site for a longer period of time, where you're getting to know guys and you're actually spending some time working together, people will. I think it's about relationships, though, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of kind of, I don't know how to put it. The kind of inter-trade rivalry can breed some negativity on sites. Where plumbers won't talk to sparkies and sparkies won't talk to joiners, and that kind of can close down conversation.
Yeah, it's something you probably don't find on Vanderbuilders though. Whenever the projects are happening,
absolutely not. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about our project, and it's one of the things that volunteers really take away from doing a project is the camaraderie on site. There's no, "that's not my job." There's no, "that's not my trade." Someone needs a lift, anyone around will lift. People will just help. You'll have 20 people working around each other in a room without any dissatisfaction, without anyone kind of chomping at each other about being in their way or whatever. People just, in a way that it just doesn't happen on construction sites generally. You don't get that kind of just that kind of cohesive working that you get on a Bob project. It's an impressive thing. When you've got 20 people in a bathroom singing along to a song and dancing whilst grouting up tiles and doing other jobs around the room, it's something to behold.
Yeah, definitely. It's a whole different environment. So you said it depends on the environment and men do talk. How do you start that conversation with someone else on maybe mental health?
I guess you have to be prepared to listen. It's an awkward one. It can be nerve-wracking. It can be unsettling. Sometimes you have to kind of take a deep breath and be brave, because you don't necessarily want to hear the answer.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to hear the answer, that person's never going to tell you. So you kind of sometimes you have to take a deep breath and have a minute. If you're worried about a friend, would you rather have a moment of discomfort while you ask them genuinely a question, or turn up at their funeral?
Yeah.
And when it gets to that level of seriousness, I think, you need to just kind of ask the question. I've recently, a friend of mine kind of sent me a message, and it immediately just reminded me of a conversation I had with Andy Bishop from Man Gang, who about suicide, and about how he'd felt once he'd planned his suicide, the relief he felt, and how he kind of felt relaxed and happier than he had for a long time because he knew it was going to be over. And I had a message from a friend that kind of just triggered that conversation in my head. And you kind of sit with it for a second. And then you go, actually, no, I am going to ask the question because it's really important and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable. And I feel a bit sick as I'm sending this message, but I'm going to answer the question. And thankfully, I was wrong.
Yeah.
But I could have been right.
Yeah, so you didn't have
but
that.
the person, the guy that I asked the message of isn't upset or offended or concerned that I asked that message. It's a strengthening of our relationship, not something that's going to damage it.
Yeah, and because you've reached out now, he knows that you'll listen if he ever needs it.
Yeah, I mean, he's always known that anyway, but...
Yeah. Vanderbuilders, their clothes group, as you mentioned earlier, has over 10,000 members.
Yeah, just under 10,000 members, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. You actually do see a lot of people putting in questions there and asking for support. It's a brilliant environment. What do you find from that? Like, is it because people help out? That's why they can comfortably put in a question?
I think I think it's about having a permissive environment. So the group on Weibob, if you put in something about a worry or a concern, whether it's about mental health, whether it's about family, whether it's about money, you're not going to get torn down. You're not going to get a load of people kind of picking apart what you said. You're going to get a load of people who say, is there anything I can do? And once that environment exists, it's contagious. Mm-hmm. If you, and in the same way that a negative environment is contagious, but the admin team who run that group do such a good job of maintaining that kind of positive atmosphere, and people who are continually negative or who just don't want to get it tend not to stay in the group for very long. Mm. And there are other things that we kind of we've learned along the way. So sometimes you might get someone who's generally okay and they start putting up quite angry, aggressive posts. So you've got two approaches. You can kind of the mod team can go, that's not okay, behave yourself. But then you kind of there's the other bit where the support team will look at it and go, why are they doing that? What's going on for them? And someone will ask them the question, and often, it's a different way of asking for help. Yeah, it's just a change in behaviour is a way of kind of, it's a sign that they're not managing something.
Yeah, so it's gotten them changes in their behaviour and actually approaching it and like having a conversation about why they've changed. Yeah. We've actually had an experience sent in from a band of builders beneficiary, Chris Joy. So Chris's project was a recent one. He sent in his experience, and he said he'd actually suffered with depression for around 20 years, and he didn't know until he became disabled 4 years ago. He said he'd made a lot of decisions with the best intentions, but it backfired. And he'd suffered for years because he'd never dealt with or forgave himself. And his advice is, if you're depressed and unsure why, have a think back for some issues you may have had and not deal with it and go easy on yourself. You can't punish yourself forever. Chris's project, do you want to explain a wee bit about it and who Chris is?
Yeah, so my other role that I mentioned with Vanderbuilders is the aftercare team. And so having been a volunteer on Pippa's project, I then was injured in a fall, and I became a Vanderbuilders beneficiary, and it gave me a real insight into both sides of that particular coin. And kind of expanding on my support role, we looked at the impact, the emotional impact a project can have on a beneficiary. There's a lot of, or there can be, there doesn't have to be, a lot of social media coverage, kind of press coverage, a lot of people suddenly getting involved in your life when you're in a really difficult place, when you're emotionally not great otherwise you wouldn't be a beneficiary. So we looked at that. So we've developed the aftercare team, and I was Chris's aftercare contact for that team, and it's basically alongside the project runs the aftercare and support. So I made contact with Chris before the project began. Made him aware of my role in terms of I'm here for support, to talk to someone you can air any concerns to throughout the project, up to the project, after the project. In an ideal world, I would have met with him a few times, but in the current climate, that hasn't been possible. Mm-hmm. But I talked to Chris on Messenger probably weekly, I would say, and throughout, leading up to the project and immediately after the project, that was more regular. But at the moment, kind of just a weekly check-in.
Yeah, and is it just a conversation, kind of, just to see how they are?
Yeah, it's very much a how you're doing, and kind of just keeping open the opportunity for Chris to air any concerns or express any difficulties that he's having. Being a beneficiary at a time when your world is falling apart, it's incredibly stressful. And then you kind of have this team of people who come in and do this thing, and then they leave, and you're left sat there going, oh. So the aftercare team is to kind of really kind of try and catch those people and offer them support. So in terms of Chris's project, the project was essentially quite a simple project to improve the access to his house, to improve his driveway, and there was stepped access in and out of his door that needed leveling out so that he can get in and out of his house with his wheelchair safely on his own. Mm-hmm. So it's essentially a simple project. I mean, the benefit to Chris, and I remember it myself from my project, just kind of being able to get through my own house in my wheelchair without anyone being there to be able to go and put the kettle on. The benefit is life-changing. The benefit's so amazing. Chris, a few days after the project, went out of his front door, down the street to the shop to pick up a newspaper and back home on his own without anyone needing to help him. And that is just monumental for him. But for our volunteers, they turned up, they did a project, they had a great time. They they really kind of, we have a kind of mantra, you kind of arrive as strangers, leave as friends. And the guys on the project will kind of turn up and they will have such an amazing time, and they get so much from doing it themselves. And then, they go away and they kind of continue. I'm waffling now. I've completely lost the thread of where I was going.
You're okay.
But I think the impact on Chris, on his kind of physical world has been monumental. What we don't want, what we really need to be aware of, is that we don't want to leave any sort of impact on his emotional well-being that could be negative, which is why we have the support and aftercare team.
Yeah, and you're saying you were actually a beneficiary yourself.
Yeah.
Did you notice, after your project was done and the help you received from Vanderbuilders, did you notice the positive effect on your mental health?
Yeah, I think I was in a tricky situation because I kind of went from I had a fall from height, so I went from fully active and kind of fit working tradesman to a wheelchair user with PTSD overnight, and it was a ridiculously stressful situation, and I really, really did not want to be a beneficiary. It wasn't on my to-do list, as it were. And I put onto our closed Facebook group, can someone come and give me a quote for my bathroom because I can't get in there at the moment, and it's kind of becoming an issue. And that group were like, no one's coming to do your bathroom. We'll come and do your bathroom, but we're not coming to quote for your bathroom. And I said, no, that's not okay. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for someone to give me a price for the bathroom, please. And I got the guys in the nicest kind of way possible bullied me into a place where I kind of said, okay, just to stop this conversation, I will apply officially through the channels. If I meet the requirements, I will accept that I'm a beneficiary. And if I don't, can someone please come and quote my bathroom? So I did. Kate, my wife, filled in the application, and it went through the trustees, and the project was approved. And it is a stressful thing to go through as a beneficiary, because you are, particularly as a tradesman, you're so used to being in control of your physical environment. Yeah. My house is my house. It's the way I want it to be. It's the way I kind of built it, adapted it, modified it to be. And to then have someone to come in and do stuff that I'm not in control of, is quite stressful. And I think that's probably the same for all of our beneficiaries. But in the kind of, that kind of tradesman's, I'll do it my way kind of approach to things.
Do you think it's like also kind of maybe to do with like pride and not wanting to ask?
Absolutely. For help? Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the same applies for mental health issues. The most difficult bit is getting yourself to that point where A, you realize you need help, and B, you find a way of asking for it. And once you've done that, you're kind of halfway there. Once you get to that point where you can ask for help, the job's kind of, that's the hardest bit. Yeah. Without question. The ability to say, I'm not sure I'm okay, guys. It's stunning. And the anxiety around that, because we keep, men don't talk. It's, it'll just be banter and bullying and go to the pub. Because, in my experience, whenever anyone says, I think I'm struggling, everyone around them goes, okay, what do you need? Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's willing and ready to help.
Yeah.
The building site is known for banter and practical jokes. What's your thoughts around banter, Peter?
I think banter is a real double-edged sword. Within a relationship, banter's kind of completely fine. My friends can say some absolutely horrific things to me, and it's completely fine and acceptable because it's in the context of our relationship. If a stranger or just someone at work or someone on Facebook or Twitter was to say the same thing, it would just be abusive. I think you have to be really careful of the line that's kind of it's it's a difficult line between banter and bullying. And it's about power and it's about relationship. If it's a supervisor and an apprentice, it's bullying because there's a power imbalance. If it's two guys that are on equal footing that are friends, it's banter. But it is such a difficult word because people say, oh, it's just banter, when it isn't. You're just being a bully. It's just abuse. And then guys who know each other really well, who work together a lot, who are close friends, yeah, it's banter. But that's just about their relationship, and it doesn't give you permission to join in, if that makes sense.
Why do you think it's taken too far, like in certain instances?
Because it isn't challenged. So people tend to push boundaries that aren't challenged. If there weren't speed limits, people would drive a hell of a lot faster. if the police stopped enforcing speed limits, the average speed on the roads would increase.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing applies to banter and bullying. I think where it's left unchallenged, it will escalate. And it's nowhere. Back in the 80s, my brother-in-law was an apprentice mechanic, and he used to spend his lunchtimes on block and tackle chained to the ceiling. It's not like that anymore, I hope, most of the time. But I think there are still extremes out there. There are still things that shouldn't be happening. But I think it's improving. I think it's getting better.
Do you think maybe because it's hopefully improving now, then that will help with people's mental health? Because I'm sure people's mental health maybe suffer because of the banter as such being taken too far.
Yeah, I think when we talk about banter and what we mean is bullying, then that will have an impact on people's mental health. I think if you're someone who feels anxious throughout your morning about the thing is going to happen to you at lunchtime because you're an apprentice on this site and they regularly spend their lunchtimes taunting you or wrapping you in cling film and nailing you to boards, in order to video it and post it on TikTok, then that's going to impact on your mental health. It's going to impact on your confidence. It's going to impact on your ability to do your job or to get through your apprenticeship.
I think something you mentioned there is if what's going on, you've mentioned like TikTok, like social media. Do you think social media has probably played a big role in this? Like maybe it being like bullying being spread? Because obviously the videos you see on social media.
I think the reality is the majority of the stuff you see on social media is 100% staged. But people don't see it as staged, scripted. They just see the kind of the bone you covered in cement. Well, hey, wasn't that funny? And they repeat that, not kind of realizing that that's a staged video that's set up for a reaction.
Yeah. Because
what they're trying to do is create content in order to generate advertising revenue. What you're doing is just bullying an apprentice. It's a different thing. But yeah, one feeds the other, definitely.
Yeah. Do you think, like you've obviously mentioned apprentices there, do you think they probably get a lot more bullying on site than anyone else?
Potentially, yes. I think, bullying tends to come down to power imbalance. So the apprentice is the most vulnerable person on site to that. They've got they're the least able to manage it. They've got the lowest kind of the smallest connections to the people around them. They're just the apprentice. So they're kind of if they're undervalued and not kind of looked after, they are the most vulnerable people on the site a lot of the time. Yeah.
How do you think you can change that? Like, what needs to change for it to be different?
I think, when people take on apprentices, I've had apprentices. My son was an apprentice. And I think you need to have time to really invest in that apprentice. You need to see their value. I don't see an apprentice as cheap labour or as someone who can sweep up and clear up. An apprentice is someone that I need to invest in order to move my business forward. I see an apprentice as someone who's going to be working for me, maybe doing my job instead of me in 5-10 years. So if you give value to your apprentices and you invest in their training and not use them as cheap labour, which is sometimes the case, then you're going to look after them. I think the colleges could probably do a little bit more. Certainly my experience of having apprentices is, college visits maybe once a term to site. Someone will pop out, see how you're doing. occasionally that will just be a phone call. So, should the colleges be doing more? Should they be kind of spending more time looking at what the apprentices are doing on site? Is there time in the college day for their tutor to be kind of checking about those things? I don't know. And I've had 2 apprentices through colleges, and I don't actually know those things, and I probably should. It probably should have been made really, really clear to me. So I think there's definitely some improvements can be made in infrastructure wise. But I think companies, particularly the bigger companies that are taking on 50, 60, 100 apprentices at a time, really need to take it seriously and look after these apprentices. They are the future of that company.
We've had another question in from Anne Carl, and they said that they were suffering from depression and they wish there was more awareness on the smaller contractor who are working in jobs at the big construction companies. While trying to deal with depression, it's not easy to try and talk to supervisors or office staff within the limited companies. Do you think that paints like an accurate picture of what it's like to be a tradesperson?
I think it does. I think your larger kind of infrastructure companies, your big developers, they all have, or generally have, really good mental health first aid going on within the company, and those that don't are certainly in the process of doing it. I know when I did my mental health first aid trainer course, the guys on that course tended to be from the bigger organizations, and they were putting in large numbers of mental health first aid into big infrastructure projects and large developers. I think that they've if they haven't got it covered, they're certainly on the way to getting it covered. But I think for the smaller contractors, the self-employed, those tiny little businesses that are just working hard to survive and with 2 or 3 employees, it's incredibly difficult. There's not the infrastructure or the space to kind of provide a mental health first aider on your staff team, for example. I think I had when I did Pippa's project as a volunteer, I'd had kind of 6 or 7 days on site, absolutely the time of my life with the guys that we were working with. And then the following day, I was on I was first fixing a farm development in the middle of nowhere. And for 3 days, I was on site by myself, no power, just me, chucking pipes up. And the contrast was amazing. It was such a strong contrast. And it made me really aware of just how isolated you can be as a self-employed sole trader. You can go for days without talking to anyone outside of your household. And that, if you live on your own, that could literally be days without talking to anyone. So I guess the question, where do these guys get support and how do they find access to those networks, is a really good one. I think, there are groups out there. There are groups like Vanderbuilders where you can get really good support. We are not a mental health charity. We're not a service. We're just a group of guys who are up for having a conversation. There are much more formal routes to support. You've got great stuff going on like the Construction Industry Helpline app, where you can get signposted to really good quality services. And there are loads of helplines and stuff out there. But I guess, where do they get the information? If you're not on Facebook and you can't join the kind of Vanderbuilders group, where do you find that information? And how do those guys find out about it? I guess it's a tricky one. The only commonality, I guess, between all of the trades is we all use merchants. So I don't know, maybe look in your merchant, what are they offering? What links or support have they got? Or, where can they help you kind of find support?
I think if you don't have, if you're working isolated and you maybe don't have a family member or support network there, joining a community like Vanderbuilders would be really beneficial. And how do you become a member of Vanderbuilders?
It's there's different different approaches. So if you want to be a member in terms of you want to volunteer, you want to get involved, then you need to go onto our website and fill out the form under the tab Get Involved, and that will give you a unique bob number. So you'll be then a registered volunteer, which means you will be one of the people that can apply to help on projects and that we can contact for kind of support and advice and stuff. If you just kind of want to support or follow or find out more information, then we've got feeds on every social media platform. The closed group, We Are Vanderbuilders, which is a Facebook group, has just under 10,000 members. Mm-hmm. And if you search that group, if you have a trade connection and you agree to the rules and apply to join, then one of the moderators of that group will admit you to the group, and you'll find a fantastic community in there. With, you know, there's some humor, there's some support, there's some work related stuff. You know, you can ask questions about lead work or your own mental health, and you'll find a really good answer on that group. It's a fantastic space.
Thanks, Peter, for joining us in today's episode. I think this is going to be something really useful for tradespeople to listen to. They've probably found out a wee bit more about Vanderbuilders if they didn't already know about them. And we've discussed some important messages around mental health within the trade industry.
Thank you very much. And it's been really good. It's been really good to talk to you. It's nice to have an opportunity to kind of get the word out there a little bit, not only about Vanderbuilders, but about mental health and kind of readdress the balance a little bit. I really appreciate it. Thank you.